EA is now on Twitch. Join us Wednesday nights when Alistair reads a bedtime story, and Sunday mornings for a few hours of chill casual gaming, plus interviews, special guests, pickup streams, and more. Visit twitch.tv/EA Podcasts and follow us to be notified when we go live, plus access VODs of past broadcasts.
Escape Pod. Episode 881. Wild Geese. By Levi Tidal.
Welcome to Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast. I am your host this week, Tina Connolly, and I am here to bring you Wild Geese by Levi Tidal. This story first appeared in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Levi Tidal is author of Osama, The Violent Century, A Man Lies Dreaming, Central Station, Unholy Land, By Force Alone, and The Hood and the Escapement. His latest novels are Marr and Neon. His awards include the World Fantasy and British Fantasy Awards, the John W. Campbell Award, the Newcomb Prize, and the Jerwood Prize, and he has been shortlisted for the Clark Award and the Philip K. Dick Award. Find him online at levitidhar.wordpress.com or on Twitter at levitidhar. Your narrator this week is Kyle Akers. Kyle Akers is a voice actor from Kansas City, Missouri. He has contributed to podcasts like Pseudopod, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and No Sleep Podcast. He also produces and performs in his own improv podcast called The Counselor. Prior to voice acting, Kyle toured the country as a professional musician, singing and playing bass guitar for the electro-pop band Antennas Up, which enjoyed success through several national television show placements and commercials. Since then, Kyle has dabbled in long-form improv and audio production, while performing weekend gigs with Kansas City cover band, The Magnetics. Your audio producer this week is Summer Brooks. So get ready to outrun the railway bulls and chase the wild geese, because it's story time.
Wild Geese by Levi Tidal. With rustling wings, the wild geese fly, round fields long strange to hands of toil. Called by the officers in charge, we labor on the desert soil. Translated from the Xinjiang by James Legee, 1871. With the end of summer, the wild geese appeared, heralding the changing of the seasons. In the bazaars on the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar, the usual crowds of silk roaders engaged in ever more heated commerce. Soon it will be winter, ice and dust storms, and the train crews grumbling and swearing on the tracks, and any sensible hobo would be long gone to work out the winter as far southwest as possible. Now, boots and fur coats made their grand appearance on the stalls of the Narantul, and silk roaders from Tehran and Yekaterinburg, Gdansk and Dushanbe argued bitterly with each other, and haggled over wholesale prices, shipping berths, and train routes. Ephraim knew they would soon be gone. Traders were like wild dandelion seeds, ubiquitous and easy to take flight. Ephraim, who rode the rail to Ulaanbaatar from Yiwu the year before, considered themselves almost a local at this point. Now they chewed on a kushur and contemplated the chase. The first wild goose of the season had been spotted, somewhere to the west of Dalanzadgad. Ephraim had worked the whole of the previous year around the railway terminus, doing odd jobs if and when those materialized. They'd exchanged small denomination money for travelers passing through, turning Martian shekels into torog and drift salt into vatu. They'd hired out as an interpreter for an old Swahili trader from Dar, did the accounts for a local dress shop, served goat stew from a stall to the railway porters, helped fix domestic robots in a makeshift repair stall, and ran errands for anyone with cash to spare. Hobos usually didn't stay this long in one place, but Ephraim knew here was their best chance to see a wild goose. So they stayed and waited, and now one had materialized out in the desert. "We're hobos," Avi argued with Ephraim excitedly, trying to tell them about the Han Gyeon's appearance. "We ride the rails. We don't go off track." "I'm going," Ephraim told them. "You can come or you can stay. It's up to you." "You'd go without me?" Avi looked more offended than hurt at the thought. "We're hobos," Ephraim said. "Sooner or later we always go our own ways." Ephraim met Avi by the tracks, of course. The railway bulls were chasing Avi at that point. Avi had hopped the train somewhere on the Russian side. When asked later, they were vague on the details, and made it undetected right up until some autonomous expert system in Ulaanbaatar terminus decided to order a surprise inspection of the cargo cars. The bulls were the Yuanese Robotniks, far from home and miserable with the job. The sand got into their joints and caused havoc with their cyborged parts. Ephraim, who was friendly with a few of them, pulled Avi behind their stall. They were still selling goat stew at that time, and bribed the railway bulls with a couple of free bowls of food and a bottle of Camel vodka each. "What's so great about these wild geese anyway?" Avi said. Ephraim wasn't very clear on where Avi was from. Avi had augmented themselves at various times, with numerous additions and modifications, including an organic aug, grown from supposedly Martian bacteria DNA, magnetic implants — their one party trick was levitating small objects like paper clips — body-wide bioluminescence. Avi loved lighting up in the bath. A secure sneakernet drive supposedly implanted into their colon and carrying some sort of stolen military-grade code Avi was supposed to deliver somewhere, but for reasons of their own never did. A full cyborg left hand with 8 spider-like fingers, and retro mirror shades that could iris close over their eyes. Mostly for decorative purposes, but useful when there was a sandstorm. Ephraim said, "I thought a Hungyan would be exactly your sort of thing, Avi." "I like these people," Avi said. They shrugged. "That's definitely one thing you don't get with a wild goose." "So stay then," Ephraim said, trying not to seem hurt and failing. Avi drew them closer. "I like you, though," they said. Ephraim had to smile back at them. "So you'll go?" "Sure," Avi said. "But come winter, I'm heading to the drift, and as far away from here as possible. My magnets don't like the cold." "Your magnets?" "They're very sensitive." Ephraim laughed and pulled Avi to them, and then there was no more talking for a while, as sand gently beat against the window glass. The hot wind whispered in Ephraim's hair. They clutched the control bar of the glider. Ephraim realized they hadn't flown a Gullfire since Leningrad, and that felt like a lifetime ago. Or was it a Nightwing? Ephraim could no longer remember. There was a dusty road far down below, but no vehicles. Animal skeletons, bones bleached white, littered the ground, a reminder that things died in the desert. Avi was to their left. They screamed laughter, and the wind snatched their cry and tossed it to all the corners of the Gobi. Ephraim held onto the control bar and glided over the desert. The glider was a part of them. Ephraim was plugged in through crude backstreet sockets. They were never noted as a child, and only got the old Lork sockets on a whim one drunken night in Samarkand. They weren't good for much other than to plug into obsolete machines, old tractors and the like. But this glider was old, the wings patched many times over, and Ephraim could feel their body in the air, their wings turning, and they swooped over the old abandoned road with wild joy. The desert was huge. The miles flew by below, and the day lengthened by the time they saw their roadside gare in the distance. Ephraim shouted to Avi, who hollered back, and together they swooped down low. The gare looked abandoned. There was a water harvester outside, and solar panels strewn haphazardly on the sand. Ephraim, who was tired and thirsty and hot, shrugged at Avi. They shrugged back and went in. Inside the large round tent, it was dark and cool. A short person in a blue desert robe materialized and gestured them to sit down. Ephraim ordered in broken Mongolian, and the owner, At least, Ephraim assumed it was the owner, fired up a wok. 2 plates of hot mutton noodles materialized shortly after. "Where are we even going to sleep?" Avi said. "Did you think about that?" "I packed a tent," Ephraim said. "Have you never gone off track before?" "Not if I could help it," Avi said. "It's the rails for me. All the way round the world and back again." "How far did you get?" Ephraim said. "Zanzibar. You?" "The spiral." Avi whistled. "They let you in?" "I'm respectable, me," Ephraim said, and Avi laughed. "Worked in hydroponic gardens there for 3 months. Deep in the down and the out," Ephraim said. "But it's weird in the drift. And the spiral, well, they always need workers, but just as long as we stay in the deeps. So I bailed and drifted the drift for a couple of years. I never went down below the 30 line again. I decided I wasn't really cut out for life underwater." "Can't blame you," Avi said. "But still, I'd like to go one day. Just ride the rails all the way down to Hainan, and then, I don't know. I guess the railway stops once you hit the ocean." "How come you never went?" Ephraim said, curious. Avi shook their head. "Some bad business with a dolphin with a bug up their ass. I've been keeping strictly to land ever since." "Well," Ephraim said with unshakable logic, "there are no dolphins in the desert." And Avi laughed. In the end, they spent the night in the Gur, huddling close by the central wood stove. Early in the morning, they caught thermals and rode on until the landscape changed and they could see lakes in the distance. And shortly after came cow herds and wild horses. Ephraim stared enchanted at the horses, who were still free, only here of all the places on the earth. They sailed above them and came at last to the city of Dalanzadgad. They checked into a hotel near the power station on the outskirts of town. Ephraim was restless to keep moving. The Hongan was still out there, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Soon it would vanish again, if they couldn't catch up to it. But they and Avi were not the only guests that day. Ephraim observed with dismay the arrival of several large, tanned, well-equipped travelers who rode in on 2 brand-new Shenzhen-made wind-up jeeps. Australians or Martians. It was hard to tell which. But clearly they, too, were here for the goose. "We've got to get a move on," Ephraim said, frustrated. "How many more Hongyan hunters are coming down here?" "You knew we couldn't be the only ones," Avi said. "And look at all their equipment." Avi grinned at Ephraim. "But they're fancy folk," he said. "We're hobos. Come with me." They extended their spider hand. Ephraim stared at them. "Where to?" "Somewhere there's a frozen river in the middle of a desert," Avi said. "Somewhere sand dunes sing. Are you coming or what?" Ephraim took their hand. The spider fingers grasped their hand and pulled her along. Outside the hotel, and parked next to the 2 wind-up jeeps, was a beat-up old van with more pockmarks than the lunar surface. "Ivan, it's us," Avi said. "Hop in, then," the van said in Russian. The doors slid open. Ephraim waved their hand in front of their face. "It smells disgusting." "Ivan's ex-Buryat Spetsnaz," Avi said. "From when the Buryat were fighting for independence." "It was a long time ago," the van said. "How did you end up here?" "How did you?" the van said rudely. "Are you coming or not? If you want to catch a wild goose, you have to get up early in the morning, as they say." "As who says?" "They say," the van said. Ephraim sighed and climbed in. Avi climbed in after them, and the door slid shut. The van, with a screeching of tires and a shower of sand that went all over the parked jeeps, shot out and away from the city. "There are bottles of water in the back," the van said, "and some tins and food stuff. All part of the service." "Do you have toilet paper?" Ephraim said. "Toilet paper?" the van said. "What do I need toilet paper for?" Ephraim sighed. "What do you run on anyway?" they said. "Nuclear?" The van cackled. It sounded like static. "I can go on forever. Now shut up and let me drive." Ephraim closed their eyes. "Where did you find this one?" they murmured. "It's good to have connections," Avi said. The van sped into the desert. There's no sky like the sky under the Gobi, which goes on forever. At night, camped under the stars, only the embers glowing in the fire, Ephraim could see the firefly lights of low-orbit transports, and the jeweled countenance of the gateway, and the other smaller orbitals in the sky. The shadow of the giant spiders crawled along the surface of the moon, and beyond, too far to see, the solar system teemed with human life. But Ephraim saw the stars, which are distant beyond compare. The whole of the Milky Way spread across the sky from one horizon to another. Only the slow, giant Exodus ships left for the stars, and who was to say if any would ever reach them? They fell asleep after that, under all that alien light, and Avi snored beside them. In the morning they went on. Ivan cursed in strangely archaic Russian, the wheels churning dust. They came to the Yoln Am and stopped, and Ephraim and Avi walked on the frozen river within that gorge, with steep rock walls rising on either side of them, and they chipped the ice and filled their bottles and rode on. They saw miles of singing sand dunes in the distance, and the snow-peaked mountains that rose beyond, but they didn't stop, and Ephraim never got to hear the sand dunes sing their mournful, wordless songs. Ivan drove like a maddened machine. Ephraim wondered how many they'd killed in the war. They rode on, and there was no road. They no longer camped but slept in the van, and the van never slept. Ephraim, tossed left and right by their passage on this rough terrain, began to wonder at Ivan's motivation. They ate dried noodles, salted peanuts, and tinned stew. From time to time they'd come to curious heaps of stones left in the sand like shrines. Ivan said they were called ovus. Some were small, some large, and decorated with blue silk scarves. Once they found a grinning camel skull placed beside the stones. Ivan circled each ovu 3 times, then stopped, insisting Ephraim and Avi did the same. They always placed a new stone on the ovu in their passing, as was custom. Sometimes they left small offerings behind, too. Some chocolate, a shot of vodka, a small bottle of snuff. Ephraim began to measure out the distance by the ovus. They were the only sign of other people having been there before them. The desert swallowed people up. It offered silence. Twice they came to small rivers and saw gers in the distance, with children playing in the shallows and camels feeding on the grass. But they didn't stop. Then, one morning, a week after they'd left Ulaanbaatar, Ephraim woke up and saw, far in the distance, a storm cloud of dust. It hid whatever lay beyond the horizon, and they knew then, with rising excitement, that it was the wild goose. They saw it in the distance as the van burst through the dust at last. It was as tall as a peak of the Altai, as wide as the Beluga Glacier. Its skin was gray, cracked, featureless. It dragged itself along the Gobi sand. Snow caked its upper layers. How could such a monstrous being escape the world's sight? Yet the Hungan could vanish quickly as the mist, dismantling themselves just as they built, burrowing in hidden places where they slumbered deep, sometimes for decades, before re-emerging to transform the world. Unlike its tamer siblings, the Hungan roamed free. Ephraim stared enchanted as it moved across the landscape, like some Soviet-era concrete statue of a turtle, perhaps, blown up to an impossible size. It was not in truth one thing, but several moving in tandem. The parts of the Hungan kept shifting and adjusting loads, pistons moving, drills burrowing, mixers turning, whole internal factories churning as they laid down a city. Ivan stopped. Avi was silent beside Ephraim. The lumbering creature towered ahead of them, slowly making its inexplicable way onwards. Behind it rose the city it had laid. Ephraim stared at the towering walls of the city, the pristine new skyscrapers, chrome and glass shining in the sunlight. High bridges as graceful as swan feathers spun the towers. A residential neighborhood to the west of the city rose in mute sand-colored blocks all close together, apartments ready to be moved into, empty shops and kiosks waiting down below. The Hungan laid down wide avenues and city squares. It planted parks and decorated the city with gaily colored signs and streetlights. The city lay there, untouched by human hands, slumbering in wait. And Ephraim realized the city was almost complete. The wild geese fly about in light, amid the marsh, where the grain once shone, Ephraim whispered, we rear the walls as we are told. 5,000 feet are quickly done. The van rocked. Great is the toil, and sore the pain, Ivan said, but peaceful homes will rise again. You know the poem? Ephraim said, surprised. I have an enormous database, Ivan said. Do you want to see it? Rude, Ephraim murmured. Ivan chuckled to themselves. The van started up again, but they moved slowly now, as though weary of spooking the Hongyan. The three of them crept along a trackless road toward the nameless city. It was farther away than it appeared. The van rode on the tracks left behind by the Hongyan. The desert had been swept clear under the slither of that behemoth. Nothing survived on the outskirts of the city. The Hongyan did not build roads, it just made cities. Such wild geese were rare, and they were old. The original machines had built cities to order across the Chinese mainland and Siberia, but that was decades, if not centuries, past. One still existed outside of Irkutsk, no longer working. A permanent exhibition and museum all in one. Ephraim had visited once, had climbed into the bowels of the maker, made their way through passages that used to shift and change as the machine rebuilt itself to suit its purpose. Some people even lived inside it now. They'd colonized abandoned factory floors and rooms inside manipulator arms as large as rocket ships, grew potatoes and sorghum in the vast acres of the machine, made homes, made children, whole generations living and dying within that single edifice. The machines were a product of the old age, before humanity took to the seas and the skies in search of real estate. Now people made their habitats deep in the drift, or high in the up and out, on Mars and beyond. The old makers broke down, or were salvaged for parts, and almost none remained intact but for the museum piece outside of Irkutsk. Yet some of the machines broke free. How or why, no one was sure. The wild geese mutated inside. They migrated to the barren lands and dust bowls where no human lived. Their cycles were unintelligible to anyone watching, but no one was watching. No one remembered them. They hibernated for years or decades before some impulse deep within them sent them on their path again, and they would hunt for some suitable place and erect upon it their creation. Then they would vanish once again, not to be seen until a new generation had all but forgotten them. I don't think we are alone, Ivan said. Fear closed on Ephraim's heart and squeezed. They had to be the first. They had to have it. Where? Avi said. Due north. They're coming at the Goose, Ephraim said. Oh no. Yes. Who? Avi said. Your friends from Dalanzatgad, I think. Hold on. The van made whirring sounds. Then a wall lit up and turned into a screen. I didn't know you could do that, Ephraim said. What you don't know could fill it. No, let me rephrase that, Ivan said. What you do know can fit in the memory on my washing machine and leave plenty of room. You have a washing machine? And submarine capabilities and a couple of nuclear warheads, yeah. But you didn't think to get any toilet paper. What do I need toilet paper for? Use your hand, Ephraim. It's what evolution's made hands for. That's disgusting, Ephraim said, and shuddered, and the van cackled. The images on the screen were fuzzy at first. Ephraim figured Ivan was using a couple of drones, which, again, they didn't know Ivan had, but then they were ex-Spetsnaz, so it made sense. They tried not to think about the nuclear warheads. Dust at first, then two blurry, moving shapes that resolved into no longer clean or new, yet still familiar wind-up jeeps. The Martians, or Australians, from the hotel. Where are they going? Ephraim whispered, horrified. The camera rose into the air and turned, and Ephraim saw the Hongyan. Get out of there! Ephraim screamed at the screen. Get out of there! They can't hear you, Ivan said, but gently. Why are they going there? You never approach a Hongyan from the front. Surely they know that. They're lost, Ivan said. They don't know. Can't you warn them? I've been trying. Their systems are not responding. My guess is they stumbled into the storm and lost their way when the dust trashed there. Ouch. Ephraim cringed. Out of the storm in the sky came an excavator bucket as large as a city square. The two jeeps raced blindly into the sand. They never had a chance. The bucket slammed down onto both cars like an open palm squashing an irritating mosquito. Ephraim stared in horror. It was over so quickly. The jeeps just flattened, with everyone inside them. Then the scooper arm rose, scooped up several tons of dirt as easy as a child lifting a handful of sand, then rose in an arc quicker than Ephraim could have thought possible, and swatted Ivan's drones into oblivion on its way. The screen went black. Ivan cursed. Ephraim, sick inside, held on to Avi. They patted them awkwardly. Look, Avi said. Ephraim raised their hand and stared. The city rose before them then. The van left the desert and was suddenly on smooth asphalt road. We're here. The timbre of the wheels changed, and the van stopped rocking. Ivan yelled in exultation and sped ahead. The city swallowed them, its skyscrapers looking down, and the van was the only moving thing on the thoroughfare of that empty place. Stop! Ephraim shouted. They laughed and cried. The van came to a city square. The giant statue of some four-armed general rode on an iron grasshopper in the center. Ephraim and Avi rolled out of the van. Freshly planted flowers formed beautiful, abstract patterns in yellows and reds. Listen, Ephraim said. Hush. They stood and listened to the silence of the city waiting. The city waited for its people to arrive. And people might. Itinerant artists at first, or hobos coming off the rails. Nomads will come and stay a while and marvel at the place, and then leave. Their cattle will eat the grass and the leaves on the trees. The city generated its own water and its own power. It would stand there patient, waiting for a year or a decade or a century, waiting for its people to come. But they, Ephraim, were the first. I can't hear anything, Avi complained. I can hear everything, Ephraim said. They laughed. We need cloth. Do you have a shirt, or... Avi reached into one of their pockets with the cyborg arm and brought out a blue scarf. Will this do? They said. It's kadag. I picked it up in Dalanzagad before we'd left. Meant to give it you before, only... It's perfect, Ephraim said, and kissed them. They held the ceremonial scarf. It was silk and light, and painted the color of the sky above the gobi. Ephraim went to the statue of the four-armed general that the city had generated for itself. Sometimes the cities the wild geese planted could be a little weird. Ephraim tied the scarf to the general's upper left arm, which was pointing to the distance. The sun was setting now. Far beyond the Hongyan lumbered on, putting the last of the outskirts of town into being. Soon it would be gone into the mists, and only the city remain. Ephraim made sure the scarf was tied securely. I claim you, on behalf of hobos everywhere, they shouted into the sky. A startled sand Martian took off into the air with a beating of wings, the only other living creature there. Ephraim took a bow. Ivan honked their horn, and Avi clapped. They looked up at them and smiled. Do you get to name it? They said. Yes, Ephraim said, but not for a while. They stepped down and took Avi's hand in theirs. Let's go home, they said. Home where? Ephraim swept their arm across the darkening horizon. Lights were coming on in all the buildings. Millions of apartments all waiting for their occupiers. The city had been lonely here. It needed people. And then its people came. Ephraim smiled at the city and murmured, though only Ephraim could hear it. Then they turned back to Avi and threaded their arms through theirs. I'll let you choose, they said.
And we're back, and again that was Wild Geese by Levi Tidhar, narrated by Kyle Akers. I loved how this story was so joyful and full of hope. We are solidly in the future, and it's a bit grungy and lived in, but there's still magic. There's still the random chance magic of Ephraim and Avi finding each other, and there's the magic of chasing wild geese, which are giant, ancient beings laying down remarkable random cities, complete with statues of four-armed generals riding iron grasshoppers. And the random chance magic of Ephraim and Avi being the sort of people who drift around, finding life and delight in wherever they happen to be, means that they are here now for the creation of this new, empty city. The first. Well, them and Ivan the Van, of course. I would think that there wouldn't be enough people in this new city for Avi, who loves people, but then Ephraim immediately personifies the city as being lonely and needing people too. So perhaps that will be enough delight for all of them for a while. And when it isn't anymore, I fully expect these two, with or without Ivan, to continue to drift around, finding their own future magic. Escape Pod is a part of the Escape Artist Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Don't change it, don't sell it, please go forth and share it. How do you share it, you ask? Well, in addition to your social media of choice, consider rating and or reviewing us on podcast listening sites such as Apple or Google. More reviews makes for more discoverability, makes for more Escape Pod for you. Escape Pod relies on the generous donations of listeners exactly like you. And remember that Patreon subscribers have access to exclusive merchandise and can be automatically added to our Discord, where you can chat with other fans as well as our staff members. So, if you enjoyed our story this week, then consider going to escapepod.org or patreon.com/EAPodcasts and casting your vote for more stories that ride the rails and drift in the drift. Our opening and closing music is by Daikaiju at daikaiju.org, and our closing quotation this week is from Mary Oliver, because I love her own poem, Wild Geese, and this seemed to be perfectly appropriate. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Thanks for listening, and have fun.